everybody, and welcome back to our next episode of Week in Strange. It's so good to be back this week. Last week, Jason and I were out in Sasquatch country with zero to no viable internet connection. So if anybody was wondering if we had in fact been eaten by bears, no, we weren't. We were out tromping through the woods and looking for Bigfoot. So anyways, here with Jason, we got a new setup down here. So yeah, that's pretty exciting stuff for us. And Thomas, how's it going over there?
Hi, Timothy. It's good to see you guys back. Yeah, I like the new set a lot. It's just the right side of pimp. It's just the right side of pimp. You know, yep. So it's cool. I always loved Paisley, but I like the way you set it up with the circle in the middle. You've got a bit of sacred geometry and a bit of Elvis, all the story, all the good stuff in life.
Yes, it is good stuff. It is good stuff. Okay, so we put together some really interesting stories to share with you guys today. For once, the internet was not barren of good stories. So, yeah.
And before we kick off with the stories today, I wanted to say thanks to Christian Morris for mentioning the Week in Strange in his video. That was really nice of you, Christian. I hope you're in here on the Facebook live stream right now. But if not, if you see this on the recording, hi, Christian. Thank you very much for the shout out in there.
Keep the kettle on, my friend.
Yeah, Christian told me he's a big fan. I haven't heard that video yet, but he told me a few times he's a big fan of the show. So it's blasting out into the Irish Sea from North County Dublin every Monday night.
Yes, that was very heartfelt from him, and it warmed my heart too. So I really appreciate that. Thank you, Christian. Okay, so we're going to start off right away. Scientists have successfully recorded data to DNA in a few short minutes. Global data production is estimated to reach 463 exabytes per day by 2025, which is the equivalent of 200,765,000 DVDs per day per the World Economic Forum. Our existing data storage systems, which can hold only so many zeros and ones and consume huge amounts of energy and space, cannot last us forever, putting us on the cusp of a serious data storage problem that can only worsen over time. DNA-based data storage may come to the rescue as an alternative to hard drives since our genetic code is millions of times more efficient at storing information than current solutions. Now, in a groundbreaking development, researchers at Northwestern University have devised a new method for recording information to DNA that takes minutes rather than hours or days. The researchers utilized a novel enzymatic system to synthesize DNA that records rapidly changing environmental signals straight into its sequences. And this method could revolutionize how scientists examine and record neurons inside the brain. To record intracellular, molecular, and digital data to DNA, scientists currently rely on multi-part processes that combine new information with existing DNA sequences. This means that for an accurate recording, they must stimulate and repress the expression of specific proteins, which can take over 10 hours to complete. The new study's researchers hypothesized they could make this process faster by utilizing a new method they call time-sensitive, untemplated recording using TDT for local environmental signals, or turtles. This way, they would synthesize completely new DNA rather than copying a template of it. The method enabled the data to be recorded into the genetic code in a matter of minutes. Nature is good at copying DNA, but we really wanted to be able to write DNA from scratch, Northwestern engineering professor Keith Tayo, the paper's senior author, said in the press release. The ex vivo, meaning outside the body, way to do this involves a slow chemical synthesis. Our method is much cheaper to write information because the enzyme that synthesizes the DNA can be directly manipulated. State-of-the-art intracellular recordings are even slower because they require the mechanical steps of protein expression in response to signals, as opposed to our enzymes, which are all expressed ahead of time and can continuously store information. This could be a potential solution to address the explosive growth in data storage needs, as well as carrying brain research forward. This is a really exciting proof of concept for methods that could one day let us study the interactions between millions of cells simultaneously. Said Dr. Namita Ban, co-first author and postdoctoral researcher in Tayo's lab. If you look at how current technology scales over time, it could be decades before we can even record an entire cockroach brain simultaneously with existing technologies, let alone the tens of billions of neurons in human brains, said co-first author Alec Castillo, who is also a graduate student in Tayo's lab. So that's something we'd really like to accelerate. The researchers are currently working on the genomic infrastructure and cellular techniques needed for reliable intracellular recording, and they hope that other engineers will be interested in the method and use it to record signals for their research. Now, I don't know about you guys, but every time I sign into my Gmail account or any of my Google stuff, they keep sending me notifications or even across the top bar that says, like today, apparently I'm at 91% storage. So yeah, I don't know if this data storage thing is really what it says it is, or if it's something else, but the data into DNA, that seems like a really strange side road to take with all this.
Yeah, and I keep thinking too, like this is just another one of those stepping stones towards encoding information into a transhumanist kind of future, with this idea of, you know, like Thomas has talked about the organics and the true organics, where there's people now who've had their DNA altered and they want to call themselves organic, and it's like there's a split now where if you start having data encoded into your own DNA, it's like, are you by definition still human? You know, can they get around certain things with Geneva Conventions code and things like that, where if human rights violations, if you change the definition of what it means to be human. And I think this will caveat nicely into one of the other stories we got later there about some of this stuff. But yeah, this is just creepy. Just this idea of taking someone's DNA and encoding, you know, your iTunes library or like your Google Docs into that. And like this idea of carrying around all your data with you and then needing to turn this over, you know, because there's going to be some kind of tech company that's managing all this. So at what point are they doing some kind of, you know, magical correspondence there with blood, you know, blood magic at this point, where you're, you know, encoding data onto someone's genetic makeup? That's got to have some kind of weird, like, I don't know, magical correspondence there that could mess with epigenetics, switch things on, switch things off. Like, because they're already out there with CRISPR and stuff like that, being able to switch on different parts of proteins and things. And at what point, you know, can they flip on some kind of, or switch off the immune system, or switch off the ability to, you know, switch off different parts of cognitive ability within people? But yeah, I think this one's really strange. And yeah, Thomas, what do you think about this?
Yeah, aside from the ethical implications, it answers a lot of questions that I've been playing in my head with recently. Now, we know that they've been genetically modifying crops for a long time. They've been putting like animal genes, like fish genes and stuff like that in cereal crops. And lo and behold, I hear the story now. Here's why they're doing it. Data is incredibly expensive to actually store, transmit, upload, download. This is why, and it uses colossal amounts of energy. And that's why the data centers in Ireland use up 1/5 of the country's whole electricity. They're just beasts, and they're expensive, and they're a very inefficient way of storing data when you think about it. What's the most efficient way? DNA. Okay. So at first I was thinking they were going to do it to us, but now I understand now why Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the United States. Just turn the entire agribusiness into a gigantic server, perhaps using cereal crops that have been genetically modified with even human genes in them to store and transmit this data, or perhaps genetically modified forests that will have this data stored in them that doesn't require the same amount of energy. And this is really what it's about, to save electricity. So here's the irony of it. The reason why they're doing this, I'll say, is because, well, you know, the carbon economy, the climate change thing is really caused by the generation of electrical power. But we need a smart grid. We need a smart world. Smart, not just smart cities, but smart planet, right? So we need literally the Internet of Things, data everywhere. What's the cheapest place to store data? The most efficient thing? Nature shows us in DNA. and in RNA, right? So therefore, what we have to do is get our data into RNA and DNA. Lo and behold, 20 years of GMO has been going on. Bill Gates has been buying up all the farmland in America. Next thing you know is that the agribusiness sector, that's why they don't want us eating meat, because they'll fill the place with crops, their cereal crops or even trees or whatever that will contain DNA-based servers. It's easy
so the
to see
nature
where
places will just
going.
become data repositories, essentially.
Yeah, and the environmental ethics of this is colossal. What if you have gene transfer? We already know there's massive gene transfer going on. Monsanto, for instance, before Monsanto patented their GMO genes, there was something like 2,000 indigenous untainted forms of corn in Mexico that were ancient strains. Every single one of them is now tainted with Monsanto popcorn genes for popping.
Well, and it's illegal for them to store their own seeds now.
Yeah,
so if you have a traditional heirloom crop and, somewhere up the road, a couple miles or wherever, there's a GMO crop, if those seeds or anything happens to blow downwind and land in your crop, now they can come after you, and they will, and they have, and they do. They will fine these farmers vast sums of money that there's no way that they could ever pay for it, because now they've violated their patent holding license or whatever on these seeds, that through no fault of the farmers, they didn't want that shit in their fields, but the wind blew it down. And so now they're bankrupt, and now Monsanto owns their farm now.
They want to turn the countryside into the biggest server, big gigantic servers using genetically modified crops, or God forbid, even things like cattle, which is quite a terrifying thing and disgusting when you think about it. But now this is the revenge of the nerds. We always knew nerds were evil, and now we're finding out just how evil they are.
There was another thing that I was thinking about while I was reading it was, say it could be just another way or another excuse, whatever word you'd want to use, for them to wipe the internet out. We reached critical mass, no more room left to store anything, so the internet goes down because it filled up, and so now it's gone.
Yeah, and we don't have the power capacity anymore to do it, but they'll still keep the internet for them, and they'll put it in plants and things like that. It's a great way of scrubbing. Well, they've already scrubbed the internet with things like Facebook. If you look at the internet now compared to 20 years ago, it's a wasteland. It's dead. Where there were 20 years ago, there was millions of sites covering every kind of hobby and interest and stuff. They're all gone. They're all dead. Facebook and social media killed all that. And I put my hand up. I include myself in that, because data transmission and bit rates were becoming very expensive. I couldn't afford web websites anymore. And so, they have it stitched up. Whether they'll get away with it, I don't know. But that's what that's all about. They just want to turn the Internet of Things literally into the Internet of all things.
And with that being said, right before Tiffany said her last thing, the idea of like another species coming from another dimension, some kind of interdimensional species, if they were to come here, this would be the perfect way to create an actual hive mind. If there is if we think that there is a hive mind now that exists on social media, all these weird digital gin coming into the hardware. Now imagine if we start having enough of this transhumanist stuff occur, where there is data in human bodies, data in plants, data in feet and cattle, data in plants. It's like, then you really would have a hive mind across not just the technological bodies of the computers and the smartphones and the tablets and all the devices of the Internet of Things, but you'd also have all this data within DNA amongst the biosphere here on the planet. And it's like, oh, okay, shit, this is like that. I think, I don't remember what movie it is, but there's an alien invasion movie. I think it's Skyline or something, but where this alien race comes along and is hacking together pieces of human bodies to make these kind of chimera type things of mixing up different legs and arms and brains and stuff with their own genetics. So it's like this idea that something could come along, and if it's already here on the internet, and then if we start bringing this into people's bodies, then it's like, then we truly do have the invasion of the body snatchers thing. And this could obviously, correspond to something that's in the needlecraft right now that could be the a catalyst or something to activate, or something that needs a catalyst. Like maybe all the stuff has been injected into people now and it's all sitting there dormant, and then it just needs the right kind of genetic or epigenetic trigger to switch it on. activate it and turn people into something entirely different?
Years ago, I went to a TV show. I ended up in the audience of a TV show, and the debate was stem cell usage. And in the audience, sure, there was plenty of like very heavy Christian types who were saying, "Oh, it's immoral, it's against the Bible, and all this." But some of these Christian folks made some very good points that were very similar to that. They were saying, "What kind of life are we transferring into ourselves from other stem cells in DNA?" And they made basically the same argument Jason has made just now, and basically what Timony has said the story is about. And I watched the playback of that show for a laugh, just to see myself in the audience, which I didn't. But they had edited out where the people in this show had talked about the potential for another life force being transferred within these stem cells or gene therapies. There you go.
There it is. All right. Well, there's some good news. Okay, next one. This one was published just a few weeks ago, about a week and a half ago. Here we go. Self-healing quasi-crystals may resurrect hopes of practical applications. Unusual property reduces the defects that have hindered commercialization to date. Quasi-crystals are a unique class of materials with considerable promise for practical applications because of their unusual properties. But progress toward realizing that commercial potential has been hampered by the fact that the usual manufacturing processes for quasi-crystals are prone to producing defects in the form of tiny cracks between the crystals known as grain boundaries. A new paper published in the journal Nature Communications found that under certain conditions, quasi-crystals can heal themselves, potentially reviving commercial interest in these materials. The earliest quasi-crystals found were metal alloys, usually aluminum with one or more other metals. This has made them useful for a handful of practical applications, such as non-stick coatings for frying pans and anti-corrosive coatings for surgical equipment. But scientists would love to create more complex quasi-crystals that are capable, for example, of manipulating light to create new kinds of camouflage or cloaking. One reason why industry gave up on quasi-crystals is because they're full of defects, said co-author Ashwin Shahani, a material scientist at the University of Michigan. But we're hoping to bring quasi-crystals back into the mainstream, and this work hints that it can be done. As I've written previously, the very definition of a crystal assumes a precisely symmetrical order of atoms and periodic patterns that repeat over and over in a 3D lattice. The patterns look the same no matter which direction you look at them, but quasi-crystals are different. They clearly follow mathematical rules, but each cell has a slightly different configuration of cells nearby rather than repeating in an identical pattern. And that unique structure that gives quasi-crystals their unusual properties. Think about a tilting bathroom floor. The tiles can only be in certain symmetrical shapes, triangles, squares, or hexagons. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to fit them together without leaving gaps or overlapping tiles. Pentagons, icosahedrons, and similar shapes with different symmetries that never precisely repeat just won't work, except in the case of quasi-crystals, where nature decided they could work. The trick is to fill the gaps with other kinds of atomic shapes to create the unlikely aperiodic structure. An Israeli physicist named Daniel Shetman won the 2011 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his discovery of quasi-crystals in 1982 in rapidly quenched aluminum alloys. Princeton physicist Paul Steinhardt discovered the first known naturally occurring quasi-crystal in 2008. In 2018, chemists at Brown University created a new kind of self-assembling quasi-crystal out of a single type of nanoparticle, a tetrahedral quantum dot. These nanoparticles are also anisotropic, meaning they have different properties depending upon their orientation relative to each other. When placed on a liquid surface, they assemble into 10-sided structures called decagons, and these decagons, in turn, stitch themselves together to form a quasi-crystal lattice with tenfold symmetry. What makes this work is the flexible edges of the decagons, which can flatten out at key points to morph into polygons with 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 sides, whatever is needed to fill the inevitable gaps between decagons to make the quasi-crystal. Earlier this year, University of Utah scientists demonstrated that ultrasound waves can be used to organize carbon nanoparticles in water into the same aperiodic pattern found in quasicrystals. And in May, Steinhardt and several colleagues announced the discovery of a previously unknown quasicrystal in red trinite from the first detonation of an atomic bomb. Even better, the researchers could determine exactly where and how the quasicrystal formed thanks to historical records from the Manhattan Project. At Argonne National Laboratory, Shahani's team conducted experiments designed to investigate in more detail precisely how they form. The researchers suspended small quasicrystals in a mixture of aluminum, cobalt, and nickel, and then monitored the manufacturing process using X-ray tomography. They were surprised to find that there are conditions in which smaller quasicrystals can collide and merge to form a single large quasicrystal as the mixture cools. Even more surprising, the larger crystals don't have the grain boundary defects usually found in smaller quasicrystals. It looks like the crystals are healing themselves after collision, transforming one type of defect into another type that eventually disappears altogether. It's extraordinary, given that quasicrystals lack periodicity. Next, the doctor approached his colleague Sharon Glotzer about running computer simulations in the formation process, each featuring slightly different conditions. Simulations can see details of the crystallization process that experiments can't quite see, and vice versa, so that only together can we fully understand what's happening. In this case, the simulations revealed that the smaller seed quasicrystals must be facing each other within a certain range of alignments in order to meld into the defect-free larger crystal. There is a long road ahead before practical applications for quasicrystals become truly commercially viable. For starters, the team must figure out how to scale up this laboratory manufacturing process, but Shahani sees promise in incorporating the industrial practice of sintering, which melds different materials together. It's similar to how ice cubes submerged in a glass of water can adhere to each other thanks to the temperature between ice and water. Sintering is also used to control the growth of grain boundaries. As Shahani's team learns more about how defects in quasicrystals form and evolve, they might be able to adapt existing sintering methods to the manufacture of quasicrystals.
Yeah, I keep thinking when Timothy was talking about this one, was it the graphene oxide is one of the primary components within the needlecraft, within the juice within it? That if some kind of technology like this were used for it to glom together into different, the dodecahedrons and the different geometric shapes that are in there for it to come across into one kind of life form, again, like what we were just talking about a minute ago with stuff being encoded. But if there is this technology, this kind of nanotech that they're somehow able to get to make these synthetic crystalline structures, that again, this has got to be something weird where they can get in there and program this stuff. And I just there's been something that's given me the willies about this whole graphene oxide thing within the needlecraft. And some of the videos, I know Tina had shared one around recently about some kind of leggy, kind of tendrily thing that some doctor had pulled out of one of the vials from one of the companies that makes the needlecraft. There's some kind of thing that came together, and it was almost like legs or like whatever it was that goes through the venous or the vascular system and creates the different clotting, the different blood clots that are out there that people are getting from the needlecraft. But yeah, that's what I keep thinking about, is this in conjunction with the needlecraft and stuff like that that's going to be coming together with the biotech field.
Yeah. When the way Timothy was reading that out and the way it was written, it almost sounds like those things are alive. The way they have to be in line beside each other to recognize that they're there and things like that. As a pagan, I guess that kind of validates my belief that everything in the universe is alive and has consciousness. So it's neat from that point of view. This is one of the things you want to admire these scientists for being amazing and so brilliant and doing these incredible experiments, but it's going to be for some shitbag thing in the end. This is the great tragedy of the whole scientific field. Wonders like this are reduced. You just know the end game will be something to fucking ruin us. That kind of a thing. But that's what I take from this story. It is fascinating stuff, really. I didn't even know about this until Timothy just read it out now. But yeah, it validates the idea that the basic fundamental building blocks of reality and the universe are conscious.
Yeah, I really found the part where it was self-healing. where it filled in its own gaps and figured out what it needed to do to make itself whole again. I that part really stood out to me.
There was a cognition there, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. They always do fuck it up in the end.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can read about it and know it's cool. Gives us what we need. Okay, so we're going to switch gears just a tiny bit. It is October, everyone's favorite month of the year. So in keeping with spooky season, this actually was just posted this morning. So this is a brand new story. I got a notification for it. So this is out of El Paso, Texas. And the headline says, Paranormal Water. EP water staffer shares spooky story about graveyard shift at Canal Street plant. One El Paso water employee is sharing his stories of spooky encounters during the graveyard shift at one of the utility's oldest locations. Superintendent Ruben Montez was a guest on Brown and Caldwell's podcast, Engineering Legends Haunted Waters, to share what he had seen and felt during his time at the Robertson Water Treatment Plant, also known as Canal Plant. The term graveyard shift alone is eerie enough, but it's taken to another level when working overnight hours at one of the oldest water plants in El Paso in a historic neighborhood. Montez is not the only one with these stories. He has also shared stories from other colleagues' encounters. According to Montez, when he started working at Canal Plant, he was immediately warned about possible ghost sightings. Quote, "They told me that there were stories about people seeing things at the plant and just to keep an eye out for it. I really didn't pay much attention to it, but later I went through an experience," end quote. Montez had to obtain a meter reading at about 1 a.m., a routine task during the shift. As he made his way down to Station 1, he felt someone was watching him. "I looked out the corner of my eye, and I actually saw somebody sitting on a pipe," said Montez. "I just got the meter reading and turned around and headed out. I wasn't going to investigate any further." It would not be the last experience for Montez. Sometimes things happen that we don't have an explanation for. So people would just say, it's the ghost, said Montez with a smile. "We always blame it on the ghost." Montez always believed there were spiritual beings among us, but his experiences through the years have cemented that belief. Beyond the incidents, Montez thinks there is some comfort in knowing that nothing has ever happened to any employee while working. He likes to think there are good spirits roaming through Canal Plant. And then there's a link to the podcast where he's actually interviewed. And we can make sure we link that up later if you wanted to actually listen to the story and firsthand account from the guy who went through it. I don't know. That story makes me happy. And I love that the guy wasn't screaming and freaking out and saying evil, haunted places and demonic things. You know, he sort of took a comfort in it.
Yeah. And also I think we're working on with the Sasquatch film, the belief that the Indians believe only certain kinds of people can see Sasquatch. It's almost the same thing with ghosts, and he has an open mind to it. I worked in this place in Dublin when I was a kid. It was a modern big sports complex, but it had been built on what was called a home for imbeciles, and it was basically an asylum where people who had massive deformations from inbreeding, big heads, like Elephant Man type things, had originally been on the site. And I used to be terrified finishing the late shift and going home at 3 a.m., walking down the steps. And even though it was a brand new modern building, absolutely terrified. And one night when we still had payphones, there was on the top in the lobby, there was 2 payphones. And I saw this, I'll never forget it, this moving black shape at the top of the steps like this. Another girl that was there who worked there used to she used to be a caretaker's daughter, and she lived on site. And she used to go down to the tennis arena. There was a big tennis arena in the place, and play tennis with her boyfriend at like 1 and 2 in the morning when all the members had gone home. And she said one night she saw a short person with a gigantic head. Now, no one else in the place saw this. And we were the only 2 that were terrified of walking. Because you'd have to switch this huge complex, switch the place off at night and go down the steps out in the dark to go home. And if you were the last one on the shift, it was terrifying. Well, I found it terrifying. there was a long corridor of squash courts and all the lights were switched off. And I'd be terrified of seeing something in this corridor. And it just shows me that what the story about is telling us is that if you see these things, if you're open to them, if you, and some people are not open to them. That's why I think you could probably see a ghost and point to them and go, look at the ghost over there. And they go, I don't see anything. I really do believe that. I've actually had similar experiences like that. That it's almost like that man in that water plant in El Paso has the frequency to tune into those things.
I want to really quickly share an experience that we had here at the house just a couple nights ago. The house that this place was built in 1944. It's very old. A lot of it has been redone, but the floors are the same. A lot of the infrastructure it's still the same bones as it was when it was built in 1944. So there's been, creaks and different sounds that old houses make, and that's all fine and good and normal. But we were up late working on some things, and it was the strangest sensation of someone in the kitchen. And we kept asking each other, are you cooking something? Or are we cooking something? Like it felt like there was a lot of activity in the kitchen, and it felt comforting. It felt very nice. Like a grandma or somebody in there, making something. And I think at least twice I was like, wait a second. Are you sure you're not making anything? I'm not making anything. You're not I'm not making anything. Okay. Finished up our work and headed to bed. We have some very unsavory neighbors. There's a lot of weird shit that goes on over there. Drug usage and their neighborhood prowlers and all kinds of fucked up shit. And there's been cops and ambulances and things over there multiple times. So, I went to my room, headed off to bed. Jason was out there where he sleeps, and I hadn't been in bed very long. And well, here, you tell the story because you were awake for that part.
Yeah. So after that, it all gone to bed, and I start hearing this sound. And at first I'm like, oh, it's just the dishwasher or something. And it's like, against the far side of the house where Timothy's bedroom is. It's like, I hear the sound. I'm like, well, maybe she's doing something in there, but there's just like this knocking sound. And I kept going to sleep. You guys ever have that thing occur where you start falling off to sleep, and then as soon as you cross over that threshold, something wakes you up again? And that kept happening to me like a dozen times. I'm like, oh, fuck, what the hell's going on? And I just kept getting the psychic impression that, no, you need to kind of stand on guard a little bit. So I went and I'm like, Timothy, do you hear that sound? Like, what the hell is that? Is that you? What's going on? And I mean, it could have been our tweaker neighbors that, they're into their.
But the event that happened the next day was what solidified it.
Right. And
so, yeah, so we were having a conversation about it the next morning. He's like, you didn't hear anything? And I fell asleep right away. I didn't hear anything. And we had talked about potentially doing some sort of servitor work to protect our house. I have my son who lives here, and we just need everything we can do to protect ourselves, on a regular mundane level. And is there anything else? My bedroom window faces their house. And sometimes they might not be making a peep, but I can't fucking sleep because of the energy just radiating off their house. So we talked about that a little bit. We left to go to my son's birthday party yesterday, and it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes after we left. Our good neighbors, she sent me a text message and said that something crazy had gone off. One of the guys pulled one of the girls out of the house, was beating her up in the middle of the street. They called the police. They were giving statements. It was just this big, huge scene. So in conclusion to that whole story, the whole point was that first feeling that we had felt of somebody in the kitchen as like a comforting type of presence, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but in my opinion, I think we were being protected, and whatever that sound was that Jason was hearing was something or somebody or some energy making its rounds around the house, kind of checking up, locking things up, sealing any energetic holes that may be anywhere. Cause my son's room is also on that same side of the house. So anyways, that was sort of a long-winded story, but I don't know.
You need to get some cameras set up in Little Run overnight or something. Set them up at 3:30. Set them up for 3:30 a.m. at least.
This is the downstairs of the house. So there's this basement area down here. And I think, Thomas, we've told you before, on the other side of this wall here, there's what we call the dead room, which, Thomas, you mentioned it. It's west facing. There's a window on the west. It's underground. And it's just, there's this terrible energy in there that feels like there was something.
Is the Manson family to the west of you?
Yes. Yeah. We'll call them the Manson family, the Tweakers. Yeah. Yeah. They live over there too. There's
in Celtic folklore and Irish folklore, west, any part of the house that's facing west, if something is bad, it's going to happen there, because the west is associated with the land of the dead.
Yeah. Right. And first here, when we first moved into the place, there's this terrible energy down there in the dead room. And it's like not even wanting to go in there. And Timothy's bedroom's right above the dead room. And it's just like, there's this standing wave of energy that's like, okay, go down there, bring some new energy into it, do some creative stuff in there, to try to, get that energy out by
a simple thing you can do, Jason, is some really strong mildew cleaner in the corners of the walls. That's an old, that's an old Irish folk. This is why our pagan ancestors lived in circular houses.
Right.
Because there was a belief that demons lived in the corners of rooms, in the upper corner. And so, even cleaning, this is why when they talk about, when they talk about the people who exercise, they go, this house is now clean. Well, to our ancestors, that was literal. Every cobweb was removed. Every corner was washed down. Mildew was considered a place where demons could. So get a really strong mildew cleaner and spray those corners, and you'll find that will really help. Something simple as that. And
get a dehumidifier for down here too, because we've got all the electronic equipment for music and stuff. But yeah, that we don't need demons in our electronics, right? More than we already have. But it's very damp down here because it's underground.
Cleanliness is next to godliness. There's so much. That's what our ancestors were aware. That keep, that's why, people, like when they came to America, they would always associate the Irish immigrants, the German immigrants, the Italian immigrants, the old ladies, and the Slavic immigrants were constantly washing the doorsteps. There was a whole thing. Americans used to always say, why do European immigrants wash the doorstep? That was to stop evil from coming in.
Well, that's very, very prominent in Southern conjure work too. The old root workers, they do all that stuff and the salt and clean floors and.
Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. It's like, but yet when the poltergeist people say this house is now clean, in the old days it literally meant that. I for some reason I'm having a lot of trouble with cobwebs this year. We're having a big spider problem in Ireland right now. There's really nasty spiders moving into houses, and they're quite dangerous. And I'm just like cleaning cobwebs constantly, and it's bothering me a lot now because it's like, why, apart from the fact that there's dangerous spiders now in the house, probably, it's bothering me. It's becoming a dark thing. So I've been I've definitely become OCD about it. I'm up there with the broom like every day. It's the first sign of a cobweb.
Yeah. Yep. Alrighty. Well, if you're ready, I know we're ready for the psychic weather report. I'm looking forward to this all week.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The weekend psychic weather.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's psychic weather. As we're entering into mid-October 2021, as we enter that point halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice when the veil lifts. This is a kind of a serious one this week. Won't be a fun one, really. The psychic weather this week will be to do with mental illness and stuff like that. We're currently at the moment being hit with a massive solar activity. And this time of year, when it happens, people who have mental health issues, it's not very pleasant for them. Folks who suffer from clinical depression, genuine clinical depression, not just feeling sorry for something. Folks who are genuinely unwell with clinical depression will have a difficult time over the next few days until this thing passes. The pressure on the magnetosphere pushes down on the earth. And this affects people who already have issues, not to stigmatize people, but people who have chronic clinical depression and issues like that, psychosis, and paranoia and other kinds of things like that will find themselves having a very difficult time over the next few days. So it's one of those things where the psychic weather is genuinely related to the actual weather and to the space weather at this moment. So those of you who are ill from with depression over all your lives, just be careful. Just take it easy and remind yourself it's going to be gone in a few days. And those of you who live with people who have clinical depression, show a little extra kindness and be there for them. And, don't patronize them or anything like that, but just be there for them. People who are psychotic and so on, it's not a good time. I would tell people who work in psychiatric hospitals or deal with the homeless on the streets to be very careful at the moment, police and so on. And this will pass in no time. We're at a time in the year where the veil is thinning, and this allows the transformation. If you've seen the recent video I made on this channel about Samhain and Halloween, the crossover entities that are not normally accessible to us, good and bad, at the moment, and people who have mental health issues, this can be a very challenging thing for them. They might find themselves having really bad suicidal thoughts. These voices in your head are liars, and don't listen to them. It will pass, and look after yourselves. By next weekend, it will definitely be clear. But tomorrow and up to Thursday, it's going to be difficult. So the best thing is to just look after yourself and take care, and take lots of salt baths, lots of showers, and eat high protein food. Especially very important to eat very high protein food, things like broth and stuff like that. That's been shown to be an excellent thing in dealing with these issues. And stay away from the beer and stuff like that. If you're especially beer, it can be quite bad for that. Alcohol is not good for anyone within this kind of psychic weather event, but beer seems to be particularly bad. And eat high protein food, stay away from carbohydrates, and just ride it out. It'll be okay by the weekend. And that's this week's in psychic weather. The sun is not being your friend, and it's being a really bad enemy for a lot of people. And it's just nature, and it will pass.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The week in psychic weather.
Sorry, Thomas, didn't mean to cut you off there at the very end of that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's it's always so bang on. I love.
Yeah, the important thing is for people to realize it's going to pass. It's just like a storm of any kind, and if someone or yourself suffers from clinical depression, you'll be okay by the weekend. It'll be okay. And if you're married or you're living with someone who has that issue, just show them a little extra kindness and make sure they get plenty of good dinners and so on.
Yeah, some vitamin D maybe.
Yeah, and
somewhere
high protein, like things like consomme soups and anything that's very high in protein. If you're not a vegetarian, is fantastic.
Yep, bone broths, chicken soups, things like that. All good. All good. Alrighty. This one had me really excited, so I'm going to go right for it. It's the bizarre true story of the Flatwoods monster. The country roads of West Virginia are, at least, so go the stories, notoriously full of monsters and cryptids. The most famous creature associated with the mountain state is, of course, the Mothman of Point Pleasant, the star of both spooky movies and bizarre memes. Other lesser-known beasts said to dwell in those hills include the enticingly named Sheep Squatch, the Grafton Monster, and the Blue Devil. But somewhere in between the notoriety levels of the Mothman and the Ogua lies one of the most visually iconic creatures in all of cryptid lore, the Flatwoods Monster. The Flatwoods Monster can be recognized at a glance. As Roadside America describes, you'll know it by its enormous height, over 10 feet tall, its glowing red face shaped like a playing card spade, set with bulging eyes, and its green body dressed sensibly in a skirt for the summer. It might also make itself known by levitating and spewing poison gas at you, While some cryptids, such as Bigfoot, have been allegedly cited hundreds of times, the Flatwoods monster made one memorable appearance in 1952 to a handful of eyewitnesses in the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, in Braxton County in the middle of the state. Locally, the monster is known as the Green Monster, as attested to by a sign in town that reads, "Welcome to Flatwoods, home of the Green Monster." But what's the story behind the sightings of a monster so memorable that it's still so prominent 6 decades later? This is the story of the sighting. According to history, it was at dusk on September 12th, 1952, that 6 boys, 1 mom and a dog, allegedly witnessed the strange arrival of the Green Monster in the tiny town of Flatwoods, which at the time had a population of less than 300. 2 brothers, Ed and Freddie May, aged 13 and 12, respectively, were playing in the schoolyard with their 10-year-old friend Tommy Heyer when they witnessed a strange streak of red light careen across the sky and land with a crash nearby. The Mays went to get their mother to go check it out, at which point they were accompanied by a few more boys, one of whom brought his dog. As Roadside America explains, the locals soon found themselves face to face with a 10-foot tall monster that let out a shrill hiss and started to float above the ground towards them through a shroud of mist. The oldest boy among the group, 17-year-old Gene Lemon, was a National Guard member who claimed to have seen a pair of bright eyes in a tree, followed by the emergence of the red-faced, green-bodied, claw-handed, pointy-headed monster we all know and love today. The 7 witnesses and the dog all fled in terror, one contemporary of the boys claiming that one of them wet his pants and were soon violently ill, which they claimed was due to a poison gas shot at them by the monster. Later visitors to the site found no signs of the monster or UFO, but smelled an unexplained, sickening, burnt metallic odor. As history explains, the story of the sighting made the local news, with the newspaper proclaiming 7 Braxton County residents on Saturday reported seeing a 10-foot Frankenstein-like monster in the hills above Flatwoods. It was subsequently picked up by national radio and newspaper outlets, with Mrs. May and Gene Lemon appearing on CBS News to talk about what they had seen. The attention paid to the encounter led to an investigation by the U.S. Air Force as part of Project Blue Book, the government investigation into alleged UFO sightings and alien encounters. Part of the reason that such stories were taken so seriously was not a sincere belief in extraterrestrial, but Cold War concerns about Russian bombers appearing in American skies. However, in the years since the Air Force's investigation into the Green Monster sighting, a much more mundane explanation, and one that will be very familiar to cryptid and UFO fans as the explanation for everything, has been set forth for the phantom of Flatwoods: meteors and an owl. The streak of red light seen by the May boys that September dusk was likely just one of the fairly common meteors appearing in the night sky. One had been reported that night for West Virginia and adjoining states, and the giant clawed monster, probably a barn owl, perched up a tree, with the foliage beneath creating the illusion of a green skirt and its extended talons creating the image of a small claw-like hand. They always do that shit, don't they?
A BR 313 adventure or trip to West Virginia is a must, because that's I didn't even know about this story. I had a friend, she died sadly last year, from West Virginia, Susan Shepherd, and she wrote this book called Cry of the Banshee. And she's a very nice lady. She was involved heavily in for a while in the Mothman Festival. She lived in Lynchburg. And she wrote this book, and her theory was very plausible, that the majority of people who lived in West Virginia were either from Ulster or from Wales, and they brought their magical consciousness with them. So that's why you have the Mothman in West Virginia. That's why you have this guy and so many other paranormal stuff, is because they brought their ancestral folk spirits to the New World, and they've been changed into something else. They've been reinvented into something else that fits with the culture. And I'm totally down what she said in this book. And she was bang on the money, I think. And West Virginia is just, that's what you're seeing. It's like the Pennsylvania Dutch, who are actually Germans, brought their magic over from Europe into Pennsylvania it's the same thing. It's transferable archetypes that are resolved in a new form, in the new world, in the new place. And I absolutely love this stuff, but there's something about West Virginia that really is a touchstone for so much of this stuff in North America.
Yeah, I thought what was real interesting was that the head of it was shaped like, what is a playing card spade? Yeah, because I want to say that's part of the country where that I want to say where only Richmond, the guy who wrote the book about the mysticism of the playing cards was. So it's just, I don't know if that's the same part of the country that he was from, but I want to say that was somewhere over there, either in the south or up the coast a little bit farther. But yeah, that was just real interesting. And yeah, what Thomas said about that, this is part of someone's spiritual tradition that's brought over from the old country, and then there's always this thing that whatever it is, the overly pragmatic consciousness of the American media does this thing of, oh, it's just an owl, it's just a something, and this always occurs. And it's with whatever it is, whether it's people taking Sasquatch and turning it into, a Hollywood version of Bigfoot or something, and just taking something that's spiritual, something that's a legitimate experience, and reducing it down to something that's ridiculous, right? Yeah. Like the same thing where they, when there's talk about the UFOs and everything, that reducing that down to, it's just little green men from space, and this idea that, it's all ridiculous, that nothing, it's like kind of that stoicism again, that beside nothing that can be seen or measured outside of the physical universe exists at all. And there's just this weird thing that we do over here, or that people do here in the United States, about just taking something that could be a legitimate spiritual encounter and just turning it into, swamp gas and owls and stuff that it has nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a deliberate usurping of, like what you were saying with the traditional folk, because I think Appalachia is very Irish and Scottish. I think that's the majority of the immigrant ancestry there. I love those stories too. There's so much soul in them, and especially these older stories that get brought up years and years later. There's so much life in those stories, and it's just so sad when your average person read a story like that and not really look underneath the surface level of how they tell the story, and reduce it down to something explainable, something simple. I'm sure these kids growing up in West Virginia, they've seen a fucking barn owl before. They know what that shit looks like in the dark and in the day. Yeah.
Even in places like Spanish Harlem and the South Bronx in New York, urban areas where you'd have people from Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, Spanish, Honduras, that part of the world, Dominican Republic, they have all their monsters and ghosts and their own kind of entities that stalk the streets of New York and stalk the streets of the South Bronx and stuff like that. And they have brought them there with them too. We don't hear much about it because they speak English. They don't speak English and are kind of outside it. But John Lennon, before he died, was talking about a massive UFO flap along the Hudson River in Manhattan, and he described it as being north of Morningside Park. That's Spanish Harlem. And I often wonder if it was like, if the Hispanic people in that part of New York were involved in this kind of thing, or this was part of their folk tradition. It was being misunderstood as UFOs and aliens and things like that. This is the great story of the human race: is our ghosts and goblins travel with us wherever we go. I mean, and the interdimensionals that live within our tribes, when they go to new countries, develop it. There's stories of fairy groups in Ireland who gave up on living in the countryside and moved to Paris because they liked cafe society. I mean, it's the same story, it's like they're just like humans, And I find West Virginia just intoxicatingly interesting, and it's definitely a place that I'm mad to visit.
Well, let's make that a thing. Yeah. But what you were saying is, these spirits and whatever these things are, that as they travel with their groups and people as they move to different continents or go to different places, they have to evolve and change too. So it's not going to look the same as it looked, say they come from Ireland or Scotland or Wales or wherever. So it's not going to look exactly the same because they have to adapt and, bring on their own new form of life too. But it's so cool when you can maybe look at some of these smaller demographics of people and try and find out, where did they come from and what corresponding stories do they have from wherever they left, say it's Ireland.
And this is what makes the Puritans so interesting. The Puritans didn't believe in any of this stuff. It was all devilcraft. And yet they were the first ones over on the very margins of the great American wilderness.
It sort of makes me wonder if that Puritan thing was them maybe knowing that stuff would travel with them and trying everything that they possibly knew to get them to stop following them. Well,
you've seen my Lovecraft documentary. Most of the Puritans came from Celtic England, Devon, and that part of the world, their Celtic countries. And they knew about this stuff and they'd raged against it. And movies like The Witch, that whole thing beyond the tree line, that just amazing content. Lovecraft, it's not a coincidence that America's most famous horror writers, all Stephen King, Lovecraft, and Edgar Allan Poe, are all New Englanders. It's all spooled out of this denial of that stuff. It still rises through them somehow through fiction and writing.
It's beautiful, honestly. Okay, so this one, I wanted to include it because we're going to sort of flip the script on it at the end. You'll see as I read the story, it's written from one perspective, but at the end, we're going to shine a different light on it, and I think you'll see why. So Maya Mahoney searches for the secrets of longevity through Pulitzer Center grant. In sunny Loma Linda, California, there is a community of people who live decades longer than the average American. Fascinated by this concept of longevity, Flagler College student Maya Mahoney spent the past summer investigating the cause of this phenomena as part of a Pulitzer Center grant. Mahoney, a senior majoring in journalism with minors in graphic design and international studies, took the Pulitzer grant class offered at Flagler and was able to travel to Loma Linda for the project titled The Secret to Longevity, Loma Linda. It was there she gained valuable experience as a journalist. Mahoney, who is co-editor of college's online student newspaper, The Gargoyle, focuses on what is called a blue zone in Loma Linda, California, made up of Seventh-day Adventists and how their spirituality correlates with their lifelong spans. Blue zones are basically areas around the world where people are living longer and healthier, Mahoney said. There are 5 blue zones in the world, and the blue zone in Loma Linda is the only one in the United States. Many of these blue zones have residents who live well over 100 years old, and the medical community attributes this to healthier lifestyle habits such as diet. However, Mahoney found that the residents of Loma Linda had a more spiritual reason for their long lives. What was different about Loma Linda was that their longevity had a lot to do with their religion. A lot of my studies found that religion can affect longevity. Mahoney traveled to California, spoke with members of the community, and gained insight into how and why they live such long lives. For a lot of us, we think of health as our physique or what we eat, but it is so much more than that, Mahoney said. It's also our spiritual, mental, and psychological well-being. So the articles that I wrote touched on that. Mahoney said that she was inspired to cover blue zones by the Netflix show Down to Earth with Zac Efron, where in one episode, Efron goes to a blue zone in Sardinia. My original story idea was to go to Italy and study longevity in Sardinia, but because of COVID, I had to look at other options. Luckily, Loma Linda was a blue zone in California. Mahoney was in the Pulitzer class with about 15 other students in the spring semester of 2021. Each student pitched a story idea and budget centered on an underreported issue anywhere in the world, hoping to receive a $3,000 grant to produce the story on behalf of the Pulitzer Center. Mahoney's pitch won the grant money, and she was assigned a mentor affiliated with Pulitzer. Emily Baumgartner, who writes for the LA Times, was her mentor. She helped me find sources and assured me wherever I hit roadblocks, it was great to hear affirmation from someone who writes for such a well-known publication. Mahoney said that she feels better prepared for fieldwork as a journalist through working with the Pulitzer Center. Through the center, I got a lot of networking opportunities, and I was able to speak with other journalists. seeing it all come together and write articles that I'm really proud of, to do all that research for something that I wasn't sure was going to happen. And when I got it and could publish it, it was an exciting adventure in journalism for me. Yeah, that's about it. So the way that I wanted is, she's talking about Seventh-day Adventists here. But in these blue zones, which are really fascinating to me as well. I think I have to look more into what constitutes and defines a blue zone, if it's a ley line or what that is. I don't know yet. But I think what she said, or this person that she interviewed, when they say, you can be physically healthy and do all the right stuff and exercise and eat good. But if your spirituality, whatever that is to you, is on the rocks, you're not healthy. So I don't know. I saw a really cool correlation between us and the tribe members and how we're essentially creating our own blue zones right now.
Yep.
And, being sovereign in our rights and what we consider, healthy for ourselves. And, with your psychic weather reports, all of that goes into the recipe on how to have a healthy life. And your spirituality is a big part of that, along with diet and exercise and, taking care of this thing we have to live in for now. So anyways, what are your thoughts on that, Thomas?
Well, it's a few things that came up then. I totally believe it, that it's an environnomicon type thing, that it's definitely related to where you live. There's loads of examples of places where people die young, or things are really, there's a town in South Wales where literally all the teenagers commit suicide. It's just an awful story of like teen suicide there. At the same time, I remember once reading or seeing a TV report about a town in central Italy where they have the lowest cholesterol rates on earth. And to prove it's the environnomicon thing, they were convinced, okay, it's a genetic thing. The people who live in this town in Italy have a genetic predisposition to lower cholesterol. And they basically live on ice cream and colonis and pizza and all the stuff we love. And they have incredibly low cholesterol. What they found was it wasn't genetic, and people who had moved into that town from other areas, after a while, suddenly have the same lower levels of cholesterol as well. So it's definitely related to the community and the area. She said Sardinia. I've been to Sardinia a few times. It's traditionally been a very poor part of the world. Although not so much in recent years. The Italian government and the EU have put a lot of development funds into it, so it's not as poor as it used to be. But the people there are Proto-Europeans. It's the most Proto-European. Before the Indo-Europeans came, there was the Proto-Europeans, and it's the most Proto-European place in Europe, along with Galicia and northern Spain, northern Portugal, and the west coast of Ireland, and places like the Aran Islands. And again, people in these places live to be very, very old, no matter what. So it's definitely, it could be a tribal thing, like Timony was saying, or a combination of both with the environnomicon, or maybe the tribal mentality makes the area, does it to the area, like it invokes this good health in the area. I think something like that. But absolutely, yeah. I mean, these blue zones are fascinating things. And that young lady who wrote that article, yeah, it's spiritual, it's mental, it's psychological, it's roots, it's tribe, it's happiness. Yeah, she's right. I agree completely.
Yeah, and where I was going to go with this is something that I see too, is it's like, especially here in the United States, I don't know, I can't speak for Europe or the UK or anything, but there's this thing where you have a tremendous amount of people who are out there, the worky outy types who, they go to the gym and, slay themselves on all these machines. And they're, for lack of a better term, they're real NPC types who don't have much of a depth to them. And a lot of them are pretty unhealthy in the end. They get weird heart disease and cancer. And it's just like, no matter how hard they slay themselves in the gym, no matter how healthy they eat, no matter what, how many bendy positions, no matter how many bendy, stretchy positions they do in yoga,
and their heads are not right.
Right.
Look at what's that Irish guy, the fighter. He's always in trouble. Conor.
McGregor?
Yeah. I mean, just today he beat up some poor guy in a pub in Italy, and he's peak performance, and yet he's mentally a mess.
Yeah.
hanging out with gangsters and everything. You know, I mean, he's a mess. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I should be careful. But you know, I mean, it's just like a week doesn't go by where he's in trouble for something.
Yeah. And it's just this thing where it's like you can do all the, you know, the right things by the book with, you know, eating the right amount of calories and all this shit that the American whatever it is, the food and drug, the FDA and all this stuff say about what you're supposed to do. And it's like, yeah, you talk about the people over there in southern Italy who, you know, they eat, you know, pizza and drink beer and eat ice cream and, you know, have a good time. And it's like, yeah, there's all kinds of, like over in Bohemia with all the food that they eat there and all the beer that they drink. There's some, you know, people from the old country will still have that, you know, and we can even think about our grandparents and stuff who would, you know, sit around and smoke a couple packs of cigarettes and, you know, live off of all kinds of weird shit.
That was my grandfather. He lived on basically lard, fried food, and cigarettes, and bread and butter and full cream milk.
Yep.
And at 70, he could like lift tiles up on a roof on a ladder. You know, look at the Russians. You know, yeah. I mean, they're at 70, they're on the piss every day with drinking vodka, and they're wrestling bears for a hobby. You know, it's definitely. I mean, it's definitely there and there. You know, more than anywhere else.
Yeah,
when I passed those gyms, I remember one time a few years ago, I was taking a train trip across London, and it was like on the overground, and I passed so many buildings where there was this going on. You look in the windows and you see this, right? This kind of thing, and they just looked like portals to hell.
Yep. Right. I know. Like, what are they running from? That's what I always would say when I was in the military. It's like, you look at people running around, I'm like, what?
Where the cities are filled with beautiful parks and beautiful river walks where you can go for a walk, or if you live in a small town, you can run in the countryside. Why this on a machine?
Yeah.
Get a bicycle and go cycle in the park, you know?
Yep. Ice cream will also give you a round ass, just different kind of round. But no, it's just, but yeah, you got to have it here. You got to have it here. You know, you got to have it in your heart. And it's like, if you know, this, like we talked about earlier, the overly pragmatic American with no spiritual depth. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter how many calories you cut out and how long you stay on the old MILF chariot is what I call it, the elliptical. It doesn't matter. Yeah, what's up?
There's a video you have to see on YouTube of Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris before a rugby match, and they're two drunk old fuckers, and they're wrestling and beating each other up for a laugh and getting wasted and talking about like the old days of playing rugby and stuff. It's just the most beautiful thing. And at the end, the two of them go, and Peter O'Toole goes, "The game is starting now," and the two of them wander out like this wasted old men, but having the time. There's just so much happiness. And there's another one. Oliver Reed died. Oliver Reed's death is one of the most Herculean stories you ever hear. He was in a pub in Malta filming Gladiator, and a British naval ship came in, and he challenged the sailors. He challenged every single sailor on the ship to an arm wrestling fight. He was an old guy, you know. He beat every one of them. He bought them all drinks. He paid the bar bill. He drank something like 3 or 4 bottles of champagne and like 20 pints of beer, and dropped dead doing river dance on a pub table.
My fucking hero.
That's the hero's journey.
That is, yes. What a fucking glorious one too.
Yeah, it's like I definitely don't want to go out like, you know, the way that, you know, living sick in a hospital bed. I'd rather go out doing something like that, right?
Yeah, if I ever end up in the hospital and I'm fucking terminal, you guys have to break me out and take me to the bar.
Yeah, but check out that Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris video. It's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see in your life. And you're saying, that's the kind of old fucker I want to be.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, as we bring this latest episode to a close, I want to thank both of you again for always showing up and being in great spirits and carrying this on. And we have great conversations. And this is my favorite month of the year, so I always come a little bit more alive for these 31 days and the whole rest of the year. So this is me in really good form. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to everybody who's watching live. Thank you to everybody who watches this recorded later. We love you guys. And thank you so much for the support. And we will see you next week.
Happy Halloween and Shona Samhain if you're that way inclined.
Yes.
And make sure the kids are having a great time.
Yep. Keep it alive for the kids. We've had a hard time kind of finding that spirit, but we decided it's not out there anymore. We got to bring it through ourselves, because if you look for it out there, it's all fucked.
And fingers crossed, we'll have a big surprise for you on Salem.
Cross all your fingers. Thank you. Bye.
Ah. Fuck. Ah.